Chapter 45, Nostalgia Attack. What is going to happen? Chere leaned over the railing of the falcon, reaching back and tucking her bangs behind her ears that had wrestled loose from her ponytail. The last half hour had been terribly confusing, and while Locke had joined them on the airship, it was only for the ride to Kolingen. Chere leaned her head in her arms and reflected back on what happened in Phoenix Cave.
I wasn't able to save Rachel, and because of that I lost all sense of purpose. My life will have no meaning until I right this terrible wrong.
Celes couldn't look at him. Chere remembered bleakly. That was when Celes started to complain about feeling too hot. She was pale and passed out on the way out of the caves. Sabin had to carry her out the rest of the way. I tried to talk to Locke. Tried to figure out what was going on. But he didn't say much.
So, you're going to come with us? Only as far as Kolingen?
Chere walked past Setzer, who was piloting with a blank stare on his face. Everyone was surprised that Locke wasn't going to join them in the battle for their world with Kefka. Locke had been with them since the beginning. Locke had been with her since the beginning.
I won't leave you until your memory returns.
Was this really it? Chere frowned. Maybe he didn't feel an obligation to the returners anymore. For the first time in knowing her friend, Chere wanted to give him a piece of her mind and demand what he was thinking, but a small part of her understood. She too had almost turned down life with the returners again, because of that emotion called love. Rachel was Locke's lost love, the reason why he decided to fight the Empire and get into this mess in the first place. If Locke got Rachel back, then he could settle down and try to live out the life they had interrupted. Chere bit down on her lip. Edgar had told her that Locke and Rachel were even engaged to be married. Chere paused in front of Locke's door, the private room that he had locked himself in ever since the returners had returned to the Falcon. No, she couldn't do it. She couldn't rip into Locke for trying to grasp back the shreds of his past that were being dangled in front of him. We all want to go back to a time when we were safe, happy, and loved. Chere thought sadly. So, she turned and knocked on Celes's door instead. There was no answer. Chere sighed. Celes was still out like a light.
Chere.
Chere whirled around, and there in his doorway was Locke. He looked exactly the same as how they had found him in the cave, only cleaned up somewhat. Chere tilted her head. He looked funny without a bandana.
Hi Locke.
She felt strange and awkward, being reunited with the man who had potentially saved her life from evil in such a manner. She felt as if they had grown into drastically different people in just a span of 1 year.
I just woke up,
Locke confessed.
Which is why I haven't been around to talk to anyone. I'm actually exhausted. I haven't slept in 3 days. I wouldn't let myself fall asleep in that cave. I was pretty sure I wouldn't wake up.
He smiled his charming, boyish grin, and Chere cracked a smile herself.
You look really good,
Chere offered.
Really tan and... Have you been working out?
She jokingly squeezed his arm. Locke laughed again.
Yeah, I'm on the intense diet of starving for alternate weeks at a time and having to walk everywhere since I don't have a fancy airship. You'll have to tell me all about it sometime,
Chere offered.
Yeah. Sometime.
Locke trailed off, his glance suddenly averting away from Chere's. Chere blinked and looked behind her, where she saw Celes standing in the doorway. She was staring at Locke, and he was staring right back at her. Chere could cut the tension in the air with a sword, and felt as if she were trapped between two stone walls. Celes looked a little better, some of her circles faded under her eyes and her hair actually brushed out and smoothed over her shoulders and down her back. The bandana was nowhere to be seen. Just when Chere thought the few seconds could not drag on any longer, Celes gave an intense trademark ice glare, stepped back into her room, and slammed the door hard behind her. Locke and Chere both jumped a little in surprise, and Locke sighed, pushing his hair back. Chere leaned in against the door.
Celes. I'm sorry. Did we wake you up? Are you feeling better? I was not woken up,
Celes barked from inside.
I just wanted some tonic. Let me get you some,
Chere exclaimed, throwing an apologetic look at Locke and running off to sweet safety. Locke frowned, turning away and going into his room, closing the door gently. He moved to his bed and climbed up into it so he could gaze out the small window. Looking outside, he could see that they were sailing over Kohlingen. He could feel his heart beating faster as the houses and trees got closer and closer. Soon, Rachel. Soon I can undo that horrible mistake. It has taken me so long, but now I can redeem both our souls.
We're almost to Kohlingen,
Mock exclaimed from outside in the hallway, his little feet pounding past Locke's room. Locke heard a door open, the sound of heeled boots stepping outside, and then a hard crash as the door slammed back into the frame.
Locke, is that you?
A senile voice rang out, and Locke couldn't help but cringe. He, Chere, Celes, Edgar, and Sabin were in Patriarch's basement, which had not changed a bit since any of the returners' last visit there. The others decided to stay aboard the Falcon out of respect for the ceremony and also because most of them were not sure what was going to take place. The room was fragrant with roses and other dried herbs and flowers that were hanging from the ceilings and walls. Locke ran to Rachel's bedside, kneeling down and grasping a hand, holding onto the magicite with his other. Chere, Edgar, Sabin, and Celes were sitting on the stairs, afraid to take up any space. Celes's heart was pounding in her chest, although she wasn't really sure why. Maybe it was because she had never seen anyone come back from the dead before. Patriarch was leaning back against a chest of drawers, his arms crossed over his chest and his wild white hair flying out everywhere from underneath his red cap. Locke then took the magicite and placed it over Rachel's chest, resting her hands over it. He then stepped back, and the group waited. The room was entirely silent, until Patriarch cackled some.
If only the magicite didn't bear those deep cracks. I think you've been wasting your time, young man.
Locke glared at him, and if looks could kill, Patriarch would have been hitting the floor in seconds. Suddenly, the magicite flashed a bright blue light, and an eerie whistling sound began to emit from it. Locke gasped and narrowed his eyes from the blinding light, taking another step back. The magicite whistled again, and the room began to fill with a glowing, warm, red light. Soft balls of white began to rise from Rachel's still frame, and they gathered in the air above her, suddenly bursting into a giant red bird, who let out a cry and spread his wings. Celes gasped as one of the wings reached out towards her, but was surprised when it merely went through her body instead of striking it. She realized she could see through the bird's form completely. All of a sudden, the bird disappeared in a flash of light, and the magicite began to quake in Rachel's hands.
Wah!
Patriarch screamed.
The magicite is gonna shatter.
Seconds later, it did just that, bursting into white crystals and disappearing. A soft moan was heard, and effortlessly, Rachel rose and sat up in her bed, turning towards Locke and the group. Her deep violet hair, so silky and beautiful, cascaded down her shoulders and curled up. Her eyes were the deepest sea green, and big. Her complexion was golden tan, like she had just awoken from the perfect sun bath. Immediately, she locked eyes with Locke, and Celes slumped back against the steps, and looked back to Chere and the others, who were in turn staring at her. All at the same time, they turned towards the couple.
Locke?
Rachel smiled happily, her sing-song voice filled with longing.
Rachel!
Locke gasped, taking both her hands in his and squeezing tightly.
Rachel! Rachel! You remember me? I've dreamed of seeing you,
Rachel said in a breathy moan, and squeezing back.
I wanted to hear your voice. Rachel!
Was all Locke could manage to choke out in reply, feeling his eyes water. Rachel's smile melted into something sadder, and the sparkle in her eyes faded.
Dearest! The Phoenix has given me so little time. I have to leave again soon. This time, I won't be able to come back. But, I have something I need to tell you.
Locke frowned and shook his head slowly, feeling his eyes water more.
Rachel! No. Wait. Locke!
Rachel reached up, pressing a finger against his lips.
With you, I was so happy. In the instant that the accident occurred, I thought only of you. And the joy you brought me. Darling! It was your face I saw when I closed my eyes. So thank you, Locke. I will never forget you. No?
Locke whimpered, tears pouring down his cheeks now. Chere clutched Edgar's knee, and Sabin was pale. Celes was just staring ahead, not being able to fully take in what was unfolding before her. Locke's cheeks were getting hotter, and he cried out,
Rachel! I have to go now.
Rachel said softly, tapping Locke's lips and then grasping his hand.
I will always love you. You must now cast off the anguish you've been harboring for so long inside of you. Today, I set your heart free. You must learn to love yourself again, and regain your self-respect.
She moaned out, closing her eyes and falling back against her pillows with a soft thump. With the last of her strength, she cried, Phoenix! Be reborn again! Give your power to Locke!
Rachel!
Locke screamed. The warm, red glow in the room began to grow deeper, and Rachel's body faded into soft white light. It broke away into 3 orbs, soaring back into the air and bringing forth the red phoenix once more. A bird's cry rang out, and in a flash, everything was gone, save for a piece of restored magicite resting in Rachel's bed. Locke moaned out, collapsing to his knees and sobbing in his arms. Chere stood up to go to him, but Edgar stopped her, gently grasping her shoulder and shaking his head. She looked back at him and frowned, but slowly, the group stood up, taking their leave quietly. Even Patriarch took his leave respectfully, climbing up the stairs and going out the back door of the house to sit in the garden. On the front porch steps, the returners looked at each other and seemed to both let out the air they were holding in for the past minute.
What do we do?
Sabin asked.
I think we should just go back to the ship,
Edgar offered.
One of us can come back here later and check up on him. I don't know what he could possibly want to do next. Good idea.
Chere sighed.
What a mess.
The group began to walk back to the ship, and at the town limits, Celes stopped and reached into her pocket, pulling out Locke's bandana. It was freshly washed, although its age was definitely not hidden. She decided that if she didn't give it back now, she probably would never have the chance again.
Hey,
Celes said, and the others stopped and turned towards her.
I'm just going to leave this on the porch. Okay, Celes,
Chere said.
We'll see you on board. You bet.
Celes tried to smile, but she was never good at forcing those kinds of things. Instead, she turned around, walking back towards the house and climbing the front steps. She reached up, tying the bandana to one of the rails, and was about to leave, when she heard the door open behind her. Glancing back, she saw Locke. He was standing there, eyes dried, one hand in his pocket and the other holding a sack. Celes turned away and stepped down, but felt her hand being grabbed. Locke sat down on the top step and pulled her down, a bit forcefully. But she sat, and his hand didn't leave hers.
Locke?
Celes sighed, not quite knowing what to say.
Are you? I'm okay, thanks,
Locke said, smiling some.
I feel lighter than air.
Celes raised her eyebrows.
Locke? It's okay. You don't have to pretend for anyone. You're right, Celes. I shouldn't pretend.
Locke stared up at her eyes, and she felt as if the ice in her heart were actually melting. She looked away, panicked.
You shouldn't pretend either, you know.
Celes blinked and looked down at the porch.
Thank you for saving me. You'll never know. You'll never know just what you did when.
Shh! Locke reached up, gently tugging on her hair. She turned back towards him, and he smiled. The setting sun was blazing behind him, lighting up his hair and eyes in an even more intense way.
I'd like to know. Maybe we can sit down and talk about it after this whole Kefka mess, eh? Or do you never want to be seen with me again?
He pointed to where she had tied the bandana, and she blushed, getting it down and handing it over.
We can sit down and talk about. But this is still yours.
Locke took it and then reached up, gently pushing away her hair and tying it back on. Celes stared at his fingers as he worked, not quite wondering what she should do. Locke lowered his hands into his lap.
You keep it, okay? Hold on to it and give it back to me when we have that chat.
He smiled, and finally, Celes smiled back.
So this means you're coming with us. From here on, I'll be all right,
Locke said, and took her hand, pulling her up so they were both standing.
Now let's go. We have work to do.
Celes nodded towards the bag.
What's up with that? The treasures of the Phoenix Cave, of course,
Locke winked, and Celes laughed.
That's a pretty small sack. You've been slacking off. I got everything that was in there. Sure. Thief. What did you just say?
Some time later. Edgar's palace was the perfect place to celebrate the coming together of the 12 members of the returners, plus 2 new and final recruits. It was a week from the departure of Rachel, and Edgar decided that they would discuss their plans for what would come next that night at a grand dinner. During the week, the returners gathered weapons and supplies that they thought necessary for the trials ahead. Others dispatched on the Falcon to gather information. Everything that was found would be discussed that night. Celes, in a simple gown that had been provided to her by the domestics of the palace, was standing out on the highest balcony in the palace, her hair tied back with a light violet ribbon that matched the gown. While she would have never worn a dress when she was younger, she realized that she had developed a sort of fondness for it ever since the opera. She sighed, resting her chin in her hands. Locke's bandana was tied around one of her wrists. The opera seemed like yesterday to her, and yet, truly, 1 year had gone by. 1 year of her life that she had lost forever in a coma, a parting gift from Kefka. She didn't know whether to feel angered or saddened by that fact. The sun was starting to slowly melt into the horizon, lighting the already orange ocean ablaze in golds and reds. Next to her was Edgar's telescope, a gift to him from a lady friend ages ago. Leaning down out of curiosity, Celes peeked through the lens and made adjustments on the rim of the scope. Beyond the short stretch of land up north that contained the Colosseum, there was the ocean. Beyond that, nothing. Except one little piece of land. Celes made more adjustments and tried to zoom in as much as possible. She gasped out and blinked. Could it be her island? She stepped back, her silk ballet slippers making hardly a sound. She wasn't sure, but it had been at least 2 months since she washed ashore in Albrook. She was in such a frenzy to leave, and she was positive that she would never want to return there again. But, now a part of her wanted to return. Just for this one time. A proper goodbye for closure of that dark chapter of her life. Celes turned, running from the balcony and stairs that led from her chamber. Dinner was not expected to be served for at least another 3 hours, and she was worried that after tonight, she might not ever get the chance to return again. Celes was accepting of the fact that she might die in the next few days. But she was not accepting of the idea of dying with burdens loading down her heart. Celes ran out into the large courtyard, where the Falcon was parked. She knew how to pilot it by herself, so without hesitation, she ran up the ramp Edgar had made for them and began to start the engines. As she started to lift into the sky, she saw Chere run out into the courtyard, peering up and shouting something incomprehensible over the engine noises. Celes gave a short wave and flew off, punching in the coordinates closest to what she thought might be the island on the radar. Less than 15 minutes later, Celes spotted the small patch of beach, little shack, and cliff that had been her home for a year. She slowly made her descent, letting out a slight sigh of relief when she was on the ground. Letting the engines run in the lowest gear, she stepped off the ship and heard pebbles crunch under and stab through her delicate shoes. Slowly, she walked towards the dilapidated shack, pushing open the door and peering inside. It was just as she had left it, including the bed with the blanket that covered Sid's dead body. Closing her eyes, she still stood at the doorway, speaking softly.
Sid. I came back. To really say goodbye this time. I don't know if you have been watching me from heaven or what. But I made it off the island. I did as you said in your letter, and I found all my friends. Tonight we're going to talk about the final battle. Tomorrow, we may even be fighting Kefka. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll live. But I'm going to fight with all of my courage and strength. the strength you gave me on this island. Plus, I'll be with my friends. I would be honored to die at their sides, and I would even be honored to die as a Magitech Knight. Please Sid, watch over me.
She paused, and then stepped back, closing the door.
Sayonara. But you won't die. I promised I would protect you, right?
Celes whirled around, with wide eyes. Behind her was Locke.
What are you doing here?
Celes blinked.
Better yet, how did you get here? Well, you kind of took me for a ride.
Locke laughed.
I was in the kitchen trying to find something to eat before dinner. And before I knew it, I was flying. Oh.
Celes turned red.
I really need to pay attention to what I'm doing. That's okay,
Locke said, and looked around. Everything was completely silent except for the sound of the waves crashing on the shore.
So, this is where you woke up? It is,
Celes mused, looking at her barren surroundings.
This is where Sid died, as well. Why did you come alone?
Locke questioned.
Not that I don't believe you can't fend for yourself, but I didn't think anyone would really understand,
Celes replied.
I didn't even understand why I wanted to come back here. But, I guess in a way, it's like me closing the door on this place and truly moving on. When I woke up, I was so weak.
She sighed, looking back at the cliff.
But now I feel I am at my strongest. So I guess I needed to prove something to myself. Sounds like you do understand,
Locke offered.
But I don't think you need to prove anything to anyone. Maybe.
Celes trailed off, and stepped past Locke.
Where are you going? I want to sit on the beach for a while. Oh.
Locke took the hint and walked back towards the airship, climbing to the upper deck. Celes crossed the tiny island to the sandiest area of the beach, where she woke up after her fall. Sitting down and removing her slippers, she let the tinted water splash at her toes, and gazed out at the sunset. Moments later, however, she felt something cold and hard touch her foot. When she looked down, she saw that a piece of magicite had washed onto shore.
Oh!
Celes whispered, picking it up and holding it towards what remained of the sun to examine it. The magicite had a glimmer unlike any she had seen before, even when the new Phoenix magicite was forged. Clutching it tightly, Celes stood up, her ponytail and gown blowing back fiercely in a blast of salty wind. There was a loud commotion of coos and caws as a small flock of seagulls lifted into the wind and sailed off towards the horizon. A louder noise then erupted, and Celes looked up to see Locke hovering above her with the falcon, hanging off the side rope ladder and extending his hand to her.
You know who you look like down there?
Locke called loudly, and Celes smiled, slipping her shoes back on.
Who? This gorgeous opera star I know named Celes Chere. You are a dead ringer for her. You have the same hair ribbon and everything.
Celes blushed deeply, reaching up and grabbing Locke's hand with her own firm grip, climbing up his back and holding on tight as he climbed back up the rope ladder and tumbled over onto the deck. Celes accidentally dropped the magicite, and it clattered against the wood.
Where did you get that?
Locke asked.
It looks like it's brand new.
Celes looked up at him, pocketing the magicite safely in her gown.
Sid gave it to me,
she replied, smiling to herself.
Just now, on the beach. I think it might be his way of lending us his strength.
46. Divided we fall. Chapter end.